Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It has turned 6 o'clock, so we will make a start on this evening's Cabinet meeting. Welcome everyone to Cabinet tonight. We are being recorded for future broadcast. I'm aware that Councillor Condacor is also recording himself. So we'll turn to item 1, which is the evacuation procedure. I believe everyone present has heard the evacuation procedure before, so I'm not going to go over that, save to say please leave through the nearest available exit, and we meet outside the old bank at the front. Item 2, apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Gutteridge. Item number 3, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations beyond those which are already stated? I have one to add, which I have recently sent off to committee services, and I'm now a member of the board of the Conservative Councillors Association. So just so everything is above board on that one. That takes us on to agenda item 4, which is the minutes. Is everyone happy that I sign them off as a true and accurate record? Okay, thank you. That takes us on to agenda item number 5, which is public consultation. I've been made aware of public speakers on agenda items 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 and 13. Mr Smith and Mrs Condacor on item 6, and then Mrs Condacor on the rest of the agenda items that I mentioned before, so I don't see any reason to deviate from the published agenda order. I would remind public speakers that they should stick to the agenda item under consideration and the subject matter that is before Cabinet tonight. If you do not, then I will ask you to come back to the matter in hand, and if you do not and persist in doing so, I will move on to next business. That moves us on to then agenda item number 6, which is the homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, 24 to 29. Councillor Golby.
So the Homelessness Act 2002 imposes a duty on all local housing authorities to carry out a review of homelessness in their areas and to formulate and publish a homelessness strategy based on those findings. The current strategy expires in April of this year, and this new strategy will pick up from where we left off at that point. And we're looking at tackling the causes and impact of homelessness, and we want to make sure that we are doing everything that we need to do within our gift to do them in the right way for the people who we serve. And when we talk about homelessness, I've said this quite a lot before, this isn't just people we see living on the street, so that needs to be made clear. There are many forms of homelessness, and there are many solutions to those issues, and we take great pride in actually identifying people with issues within our homeless communities and helping them out as best as we possibly can. Although that isn't to say that everybody is satisfied with the level of help that they are offered, and also that sometimes when we do offer help to people who are homeless, they don't actually accept it. So there are two ends of the scale and a big spectrum in between. So this strategy is actually something that has been produced in partnership with our external third-party providers as well. So there's not just us that deals with homelessness. However, we are the lead authority within our borough, and this is our document that we have to produce through the statutory legislation. So I'll present that, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Markham, thank you. We do have 2 public speakers on this item. I'll turn to Mr Smith first.
Responsible for producing this corporate fairy tale should hang their heads in shame. It bears no relation to the reality of the misery that this is being caused by the council's housing department, who are in particular the housing homeless services and their partners. With the complaint system being broken deliberately to stop residents registering their many and valid complaints, anyone who dares to draw attention to this cruel, vindictive service are targeted by the Safer Neighbourhoods team with false allegations, using their partners to actively try to silence any voice that exposes the corruption in this corporation and the criminal behaviour, using the courts to criminalise residents for exposing your crimes, wasting tens of thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money to silence valid complaints about your actions. The levels this corporation will stoop to protect its criminal activities is endless. This corporation and its partners in this report are not fit to serve this community, in particular the Safer Neighbourhoods team, particularly the people charged with running them, Claire Golby and Christian Shaw. Claire Golby is under investigation for her hateful remarks about the SEND children who have been victims of abuse by the Safer Neighbourhoods team. And Christian Shaw at
the police is not the responsibility of the council, Mr.
who have been
Smith.
under investigation for their role in the death of a vulnerable young man in the borough. 7 years and it's still ongoing. Two people heading the Safer Neighbourhoods team is
item, or I will move on.
organising, and is why the whole organisation should be replaced for the safety of residents.
In which case
of
we'll
the
move
borough.
on because we're straying beyond the agenda item.
That we
Mrs.
are paying
Condacor,
over
you're the next public speaker.
£400,000 for 5
Mrs. Condacor,
executives to
you're the
oversee
next
this
public speaker.
corporation proves that they are unfit to serve, and they should go as well.
Mr. Smith,
Thank you. Good night.
Mrs. Condacor, I trust you'll bring some sanity to the rest of the proceedings.
Points to make. Actually, the printed version does not seem to be exactly the same as the online version, because I picked up quite a few typos and problems and things which don't seem to be in here. So that is an issue, because obviously most of my comments were related to that. I think it's totally inappropriate to have a photo and forward by Councillor Golby or any politician. I mean, I know why it's Councillor Golby, because that's her portfolio holder. But it is a strategy for the borough, for the council. It's not from your particular party, and it will date, and the strategy should be apolitical. If at the next elections the control of the council would change and things, this strategy would still be in place. So I think that's very inappropriate. Why has this not gone to a scrutiny panel first? It's a really important bit of protocol and things. I mean, it should surely have gone to the housing scrutiny panel first for discussion. Other little things like...
Mrs. Klein, I'm trying to give you my full attention, but it's been... Has it been resolved? Okay, sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure I was able to pay full attention to what you were saying. Please continue.
Stood out for me was that 82% of the people who are coming for help and things have been diagnosed with a mental health problem. So I actually want you as the council to write to the government, and campaign wherever you can. We need much, much better mental health services, because this, although you're not responsible for mental health services, it is coming back to the whole borough as a problem. Similarly, a lot of the problems would be helped by stopping the right to buy, because that has actually been a massive cost to society, where people, things are coming, there's far fewer rental properties at a reasonable rate. I know that's not your party policy, but things. The other comments, say, don't seem to tie in with what I saw online, so I won't make them. Apart from there are some glaring typos and things that should be clarified. On the page 13 and 14, I believe it is, of the actual strategy, the things against the columns just sort of run out. Young person aged 18 to 25 years requiring ... That is not helpful to anyone who hasn't seen the fuller version. And there was also one of the other tables said it was from 2010 to 2023, this one here, and every year is labelled as 2010. So someone hasn't proofread it, and that's, you know, it happens time and time again. So it'd be really good if those things were actually picked up before it goes out to be adopted. So I guess most of you haven't actually read that and picked those errors up. Thank you.
On what Mrs. Condacor has said? No. In which case we'll go to any non-cabinet member. Councillor Condacor.
And that's not the most important thing, but it just shows these documents aren't being read. I mean, on the slightly updated version on page 24, every single year is down as 2010. There is just no checking of this stuff. I echo what Michelle says. This document should go to the scrutiny panel. It should have someone, an officer responsible, able to ask questions, have a look at all the information. It has cost a vast amount of money to produce this, and we need people to be engaged in it. It shouldn't just be something on the wall. And then coming to the issues of homelessness, we have about 1,700 empty homes in the borough. The vast majority will get reused within 6 months to a year, but there's hundreds and hundreds that are not being reused. Yeah, we need to be looking at this as different opportunities. Yeah, can we improve supply of housing? We then have the other end of things when we're failing, when we're evicting people, the people who sometimes have mental health problems. We've had people in this chamber trying to talk to me and other councillors to try and get someone to help them because the council hasn't managed to talk to them. You know, the front door is locked so much of the time. Officers are unwilling or instructed not to talk to people. So we do have a lot of things we need to sort out. And I think a scrutiny panel would be a great environment to actually get people in and actually do a proper look at this stuff. If you look at things like the homeless survey, yeah, we found 10 people sleeping rough. Having blocked up all the doorways in the town centre, like Debenhams, etc., these people are sleeping rough further out. Particularly in the summer, we have 2 or 3 sleeping out in Weddington. I'm sure there's 2 or 3 sleeping out in every ward in the borough. And so we're only seeing a very small number that are actually very visible. And because of the dangers of being homeless, a lot of them are sleeping out in little woods and coppices, etc. And the data is so useful. We've got some diddy little graphs that are unreadable. I think at the end of the appendix, which is a source of data, we should have some data tables. So actually we get the values included so we can actually see the data and include all the people who didn't respond. When I queried about all this data, one of the points the officers made was, like by sex or by nationalities, some people don't answer. Well, if we don't know the don't knows or won't answer or etc., we don't get a full picture. So I think the data tables are really important. And this is such an important subject. We should be having working parties on this. We should be having scrutiny on this. Homelessness costs society an awful lot of money. And it's many reasons. Yeah, there's the young who are chucked out of their homes, the people with drug problems, the people with mental health problems.
Councillor.
Chair, can I please have a proper working party on homelessness? Because it's a massive problem. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Condacor. Any points of clarification on what was said? Okay, no. What I would point out, Councillor Condacor, is that scrutiny is not within the control of the Cabinet. If scrutiny wishes to have a look at the homelessness strategy, then it is by all means invited to do so if that is what it wishes to do. And I am sure that Councillor Golby and her team will be more than happy to support any inquiry that they may have. But to say that and I think it's also important to say, actually, that you have alluded to some very specific individual cases and you are not privy to all of that information and there are ongoing court proceedings with a number of them. I don't think you should be commenting on them without knowing the full facts behind those cases, because what you may have been told is not accurate. And I know certainly from myself, I have been harassed at home by some of these people, and I know that Councillor Golby has as well, which is completely unacceptable. And there are always 2 sides to a story. No, because no, you can't. I've corrected something you've said. Councillor Condacor, you know that any non-cabinet member speaking is at the discretion of the chair. It's not required. Councillor Condacor, you've had your say. I've had mine. End of. Councillor Golby, you know the rules by now. You've been here long enough. There is no right to reply. There isn't. You've been here long enough. Please learn the rules. Councillor Golby.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, Mr Smith's left the room, but he is talking in terms of complete fantasy and conspiracy theory, for sure. The stuff that is coming out of his mouth is, you can't even begin to counter it because it's not in the realms of reality, quite frankly. The complaints system for anybody that wishes to make a complaint is there to be used. It's not shut down. It's not kept out of the realms of people. The fact is that we have people who we house on a temporary basis who do not abide by the rules. We've had temporary accommodation, not only us, but certainly P3, that has been completely trashed. P3 have had to spend significant amounts of money on a certain individual who was pretty much harassing their staff. They had to get injunctions against this member who has been harassing P3 staff. I mean, I think in one instance it cost them around £50,000 to refit one of the properties that this individual was living in. And I have a feeling that this individual is somebody who Councillor Kandaka might be alluding to. But still, there are two sides to every story, without a doubt. And in respect to the OSPs, it has been pointed out that the strategy has been on the forward plan at the OSP for quite some time. And if a councillor wants to bring it in front of the committee for review, they are well within their rights to do that. They can go through and submit a member's inquiry at that point to the OSP at any time. It's been there on the forward plan. So I take your point about the typos. It's not something that I enjoy. But to say that the documents haven't been read is not true. They go through various filters, and sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees because you've read it that many times that you just, you don't spot it. So that's something that I'll pick up with the team. The mental health problems. This was brought up at the last council about us evicting people with mental health problems, and I corrected that then, that people with mental health problems get offered a lot of assistance and they don't necessarily take it. So we don't just go evicting people, and I believe that officers have actually clarified this with you, that we don't just go evicting people who have mental health issues. We have a full support system in place should they require it and want to accept that help. Now, again, there are varying degrees of people with mental health problems. There are some with greater capacity than others, and the ones who are skimming just on the edge of having full capacity, they are responsible for their actions. We have tenancies for a reason. We have to also take it into consideration, particularly when you're talking about closed communities and the communities that live close together in, for example, blocks or the ILUs, the accommodations that aren't houses, that you have to take into consideration the impact on behaviour that the neighbours have, because it's not nice being terrorised in your own home, and some people do that. And some of these people then claim that they've got mental health issues and they go through capacity checks and are found not to have the mental health issues that are being claimed and are in fact in full capacity. I don't actually agree with the fact to say that officers are being instructed not to talk to anybody. That is completely false. That is not the case at all. There are certain protective measures that have to be taken when we deal with certain individuals, and there are certain individuals who cannot be approached because they are a risk to officers and to councillors. That is very, very serious, and it is a last resort that we have to take, but we do have to take into consideration the fact that officers cannot deal with everybody in the way that they wish to be dealt with, and some people do get violent. And it may be the people who you look at and think, they're 8 stone wet through, what are they going to do? But some people get very violent. And officers do have to deal with that. So if it gets to a point where we refuse to deal with somebody, there has to be a very, very good reason, and a lot has to be experienced before we get to that point. Again, because we understand that these are vulnerable people, and nobody wants to turn away a vulnerable person. Nobody wants to have to say, we can't deal with this anymore. But we do have to put in protective measures for our staff. We do have to put in protective measures for people like me, unfortunately, you know, because they do come after me. But I won't sit here and have you say that they're instructed not to talk to them, because that is not the case. That is absolutely not the case. And I will leave it there.
Important points, actually. Before a court will grant a possession order, it must be satisfied that a possession order is reasonable in the grounds and that it meets the legal tests. There are what are called pre-action protocols, which the judge has to be satisfied have been met. If there is a suggestion that someone may lack capacity, the judge can and does order capacity assessments of those people, and if necessary, the court can invite the official solicitor to act on their behalf, or find what is called a litigation friend, someone to act on their behalf before the court. And every single possession list before the court has a duty solicitor scheme for possession work only. So if anyone's house is at risk, whether it be rental or mortgage, then they can approach the duty solicitor scheme for free, and they will go in and represent them. But the earlier they engage with the duty solicitor, the better. They can do so before they get to court and at court itself. And I know that the housing team will signpost people to those sources of support, but it is always a last resort. But if we do find that there are cases where there are, say, £7,000 worth of rent arrears, everyone in this chamber at budget said we wanted to see more social housing in one way or another. The only way we are going to get that additional social housing is by building it, and to build that we need the funds to do that, and that means that we have to have the money which is owed to us coming in so that we can replenish the stock, revitalise the stock, build new stock, acquire new stock. And that means that there is not just a legal contract, but a social contract that this council has with its residents, that if we are providing you as a council with a house at significantly subsidised rates, we expect you to follow the rules, engage with us wherever possible. If you fall into trouble, we will do everything we can to help. But at the end of the day, there are a line of people outside our doors wanting social housing. If someone is being aggressive, being violent to their neighbours, why do they deserve a house over someone who has 3 kids, who just wants a nice quiet life to bring their kids up in, instead of being in a hotel? I will put my money and my backing on that family every single time over the person who is terrorising their neighbourhood. They have forfeited that right to our help, and I'd make no apologies for that. So we move on then to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendations, subject to the typos being addressed, please show. Thank you. That is carried. That moves us on to agenda item number 7, which is the Bedworth Physical Activity Hub update. Councillor Markham.
Yeah, thanks. It is quite self-explanatory. But as we know, the Bedworth Physical Activity Hub has already been approved at previous Cabinet. And this report is before us today to agree REBA Stage 4 starts early, so that the initial enabling works can go ahead, and to prepare the site for the project to continue in the timescale required. It's crucial that enabling works are undertaken on site to keep within the agreed time limits. Enabling works identified being on site in early April to establish pathway construction, site entrance for construction, hoarding and compound setup, with the ability to commence earth-moving works at the Bedworth Miners Welfare Park. So basically we just need this to be agreed so that it can go forward, and I ask for approval as recommendations printed on page 102. Thank you.
Okay. We have Mrs. Condicle down to speak.
To see this happening, but I have severe reservations with what I've been reading in this report. It seems very dubious to spend £3 million on something which you haven't got all the money for, and things could be found, and things, we could have 3 million spent and have absolutely nothing to show for it. In fact, be worse off, because you then have to try and go back on what's actually been done. £1 million contingency seems very little on an estimate of 30.6 million. If you've watched any of the grand designed programmes which have been going on for many years, they invariably go well over budget, and even when there's 10% of contingency, that gets eaten up. So I think 1 million is not enough contingency in there. It seems very sad that lots of things will go, particularly the skate park. It says the learn to ride and skate park facilities will be reviewed to take account of the overall budget, and revisions to these areas may be made if required. I know from every project that's ever happened with either of the councils, with county or here, they go over budget. We're told with the Bermuda Bridge thing about cycle bits, oh, yes, that will be done if there's money left over. Of course, there's no money left over. And again here, and the skate park was removed. You were told us that was because we were going to have this lovely spanking new one. It looks like that is very likely not to happen, and it's just very, very sad. Further in, what does JCT mean, please? I couldn't find anything to explain that. To sign off the formal JCT contract, what's that? Can anyone tell me?
No, Mrs. Condicle.
Well, I hope someone's, the lack of reply from anyone is not encouraging. And the removal of the green corridor. So for people getting there by bike and what have you and things, it's just very, very sad. And, you know, although it would be really hard to say that you have to build it on the same site, it would be much, much safer if it'd been decided there and then, knock it down, build it, rebuild it. We'd probably have finished rebuilding it virtually by now. So, thank you.
Clarifications, Mrs. Condicle. I will give officers an opportunity to come in a bit, because there might be some technical aspects to answer. No. Councillor Condicle, as a non-cabinet member, I'm expecting you want to speak.
One of the key things from many, many years of watching grand designs is you see the real problem is always getting out the ground. You can estimate the cost of building brick walls and doing all the above ground stuff fairly accurately. But it's really clear from this officer's report that the big unknowns and the point at which we can have a price from the contractors is when they actually know what they're building on. Are they building on solid ground, or are they building on blancmange? And the history of the park implies they're probably building on something like blancmange. It has always been a project struggling with budgets. It has always been over-engineered and gold-plated. If you look at the size of the building, it is a superb leisure centre out of all proportion to what we've had in the past in Bedworth. And it's good that we're going to get a bigger leisure centre, but if it becomes such a gold-plated thing, it will sink in the blancmange. And when we look at the officer's report, it said the cost of the project was initially identified as £27.5 million. We know an identical leisure centre in Dover a decade before was 26 million. The estimates were never realistic. And you can't just blame all the wars and all the other issues for the price going up. Fundamentally, this project's gone the same way as the climbing wall, the council depot and all these. There's been too much optimism and no one actually being that sanity check. This project is something we desperately need. We desperately want a new leisure centre in Bedworth, and it's going to be so sad that we may not get one because we are blind to the risks. I hope that the ground is solid, and I hope construction costs, when we get to the tendering process, are enough to be affordable. But I really fear for this project, because the alarm bells are really ringing when I I hear things like ground investigations, and we haven't yet got a price or even a order of magnitude with a range of prices that this may get at the end of REBA stage 4. Yeah, we should be doing better. We should be doing a safer process. And I agree with Michelle, we should really have looked at the option of building on the existing site. I know we've had the pain of 18 months of not having a pool, but we could guarantee to have a replacement then at a lower cost and built on ground we know is relatively solid. Thank you, Chair.
Cool. Anything that officers wish to come back on? Director Hollis.
Some of those points. If I can just point out on page 115, it does detail that the skate park and the learn to ride cycle facility is included in the 30.6 million. And yes, it does detail in paragraph 3.2, but until we've got the final price, we'll have to review everything as it comes in. The REBA stage 3 pricing and estimate was based on a frozen design of the D-scope project. Nothing has changed since then. What has changed since 2021-22 is that the price of construction, inflation and everything else has increased dramatically compared to what it was prior to COVID. So the price, the 27 million priced at that time was correct. That was part of REBA and professional cost consultants looking at the size of the Bedworth Physical Activity Hub at that time. As reported to September Cabinet, the D-scope project was redesigned, and we brought that forward to planning in February to look at the design of the facility and making that slightly smaller and within a project budget set that we've now got for 30.6. We are working and have been working very hard with the project management team, the cost consultants and also the preferred contractor BAM, and the figure that they provided of the 30.6, they were comfortable with that at the time. Obviously, market changes, and the feeling is with the Sport England consultants and other partners is that there's not been significant changes since that estimate was forthcoming. So yes, we need to wait for that final figure, but there is some comfort in that. We are trying to de-risk the project as much as possible in terms of land and site investigations, which is why those works have been undertaken prior. But I think until we have that final figure and that comfort, we're working with external partners, consultants. We've got Sport England sitting there as a critical friend, and they are evaluating this project along with other projects that are being delivered across the country. The Dover project was delivered at that price, but that is several years ago. And I think what people do forget is it was probably 3 years previously, or 2 years previously, a contract was signed for that to be delivered, because it's an 18-month, 24-month delivery of a project. So a contract is signed 2 years prior to it was actually completed, if not longer. And that 5 years ago for the Dover, the industry was totally different for construction costs. It's far different to what we are now. So I think it's a realistic timescale. We've got to meet specific requirements for D-Look and for Sport England, and that is the reason why we're progressing at this time. Thank you, Chair.
I get really frustrated when we constantly get this spectre of doom being talked about with this project. And it's always from the same quarters, and we've heard it again from the speakers tonight. We have worked tirelessly as a cabinet with officers across various disciplines, from finance to procurement to business and regen to leisure, as well as, and this is the critical thing, external consultants in their fields, which we don't have the expertise for, to actually try and get this right. Yes, the Gresham Road experience wasn't great, and in fact I remember calling that out in opposition. Again, having the climbing wall was a disaster, but that was because it was all done internally at great speed with very little breathing room to actually consider these things. On this and on all the other regen projects, it has to be said, we are always going back to first principles of what is it we want to achieve and can we afford what we want to achieve. None of the projects ever have been gold-plated. That is categorically untrue. Where we can take things out, we have done to bring the cost down. It did start off at 27 and a bit million pounds. It ballooned to 34 million at one point, And it may be an inconvenient truth, and Councillor Condacour said, oh, I'm fed up of hearing about the war and Ukraine and the economy and this and the other. I'm sorry, but it happened. Facts are facts. You can't get away from them. Interest rates have gone up to 6% when they were at 0.25% before, having a massive impact on the economy and on local authorities' ability to borrow and what we can afford. We have seen construction prices go up year after year as a result of the supply chain issues, because Ukraine and Russia have impacted what is a global supply chain. We are not immune from these things. So we have to keep banging on about them because it is the truth. It is an inconvenient truth to some, but it is the truth nevertheless. And I actually think it is vital that we get on with this. It wasn't, the skate park was actually taken out because it was unsafe. That was the report. It was a danger to the public. And that was a truth we could not escape either, so it was removed. Do we then put another temporary one in to take it out whilst we build the new one? No. We are not going to spend twice for something we only need once. It comes back to Councillor Golby's old adage of measure twice and cut once. We can live without it for now, as long as we get it in the future, once the whole scheme is delivered. And I think the residents of Bedworth and the surrounding areas, because it's not just Bedworth that use it, there are people from Whitestone and Bulkington that actually go over and cross the border into Bedworth, so to speak. We are allowed over there, contrary to some popular belief. And I know I spent many years going over to Bedworth and my grandparents in Whitestone. You'd go over that way because it was easier. So we have gone through this line by line, and it feels interminably long time going through it, but I know myself and the finance portfolio holder and Councillor Markham, together with the officers, we have strained every sinew to get this into budget because we know how important it is to the residents of Bedworth and beyond. And I'm actually proud of the work we've achieved, even if no other party is. So the Chief Exec would like to mention something as well.
Thank you, Chair. There's just 2 or 3 points I wanted to emphasise as well from an officer perspective. The first one of those is the initial cost of 27 million for the initial scheme. That was put together working very closely with Sport England and their cost experts. Now, they obviously oversee schemes of this nature up and down the country, so there's that ability there to make sure that was of the right quantum. I think that's very important to note, that it wasn't just something that we came up. We were working very closely with Sport England. So at that point in time, the £27 million circa was an accurate cost. The second point to make is that we've done some initial ground investigations, and that is partly why the scheme has been redesigned to take account of those ground investigations and come up with a centre that will be able to be built on the ground conditions there. So again, that is forward looking and looking in the detail of how we construct this. The third point relates to why, in my view, it is absolutely correct that we build a new centre before we decommission the old one, and that is to provide our residents with a service for the longest time we can, and not withdraw that service in an area where we know we have health issues. So why would the council wish to withdraw a health and wellbeing centre for a prolonged period of time and deny our residents access to that? And then the fourth very small point is JCT, is Joint Construction Tribunal, which is a very well established form of contract used in the construction industry. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Any other Cabinet member? I know Councillor Markham wishes to come in.
It's something that was just said at point 3. Why would we knock it down, which would leave our residents without any facility for a couple of years? I mean, that just wasn't an option. The reason that we're building it is so that there is next to it, and then knocking it down after, is so that there will be a continuous use for our residents. It just wasn't an option to knock it down first. Thank you, Chair.
Startling statistics, and I make no apology for banging on about it, because I do it with my Warwickshire district leader colleagues, and I think they're fed up of me banging on about it, but I'll carry on. is that of the 22 most deprived areas in Warwickshire, 17 of them are in Nuneaton and Bedworth. And where the physical activity hub is, in Bedworth, it is in the epicentre of almost every single area of deprivation in Bedworth. When you look at the map, you lay it over where the physical activity hub is, it is right within the epicentre of where almost every single area of deprivation is in Bedworth. And to take that out would be a dereliction of duty, so we have to make difficult decisions in order for the long-term benefit of the residents, and I think that's exactly what we're doing here tonight. And I just think it's a shame that others can't necessarily see that. So unless there's anyone else who wishes to comment, we'll move to the vote on the recommendations. All those in favour, please show. That's carried. Thank you very much. That moves us on to agenda item number 8, which is Building a Better Borough Delivery Plan 24-25. I will move that as leader of the council. It is there as on one of the addenda. I find the right one. Yep, it's on. I think we ought to label these addenda 1, 2 and 3 in future if we're going to have these. So it's on page 2 of the addenda, and it goes through a number of the areas, but I think it's also important to note that this has been in place for 3 years now. There have been some great improvements, some areas where we would have liked to see more improvement over the years, but I think it's fair to say that it will need a full wholesale review after the election anyway, as I think it is good practice to do in any event after a period of 3 or 4 years. So I think it is a statement of where we are now, not necessarily the full picture at the direction of travel, because it does need some review, and I'm sure the new chief executive will also like to get his hands on that as well at some point. Does that receive a seconder? Councillor Croft, thank you. I have Mrs Condacor wishing to speak.
My main comment was really, it was just very disappointing that priority 3 sponsors sustainable green approach, which is needed more than ever. I mean, we've seen the effects of climate change, the wettest, February ever, and things, that it's a lot of those ones which are amber rather than green, and, just not seeming to be tackled with the same enthusiasm as other parts of the strategy. On number 6 on the section 3, it does say a draft green space strategy produced for December 23. So I would love to have a pointer as to where can find that and what consultation is going on over it, and just a bit more information on that. Thank you.
That's really good, but the delivery is virtually non-existent. And there's bits like trying to collect more Section 106 money, which is laudable, but we've still got so much we haven't spent from the previous 106 money we've already collected. Particularly in Weddington, we've got £200,000 to improve the footpaths. Whether we ever get that done, and that's exactly the sort of thing the Build Better should be doing. It should be saying we need to actually get the money we collected transformed into the mitigation. And yet our footpaths are being washed away by all the storms, which then enhances the reason why we need to be looking at the climate change issues, which are also being deleted by this council. Everything goes hand in hand. More housing, more pressure on the footpaths and everything else, or infrastructure. And the Build Back Better should be building the stuff we need to cope with a larger population, more climate change, more stresses on our system. And even like little things like improve amenity lighting and enclosed space lighting. That would be absolutely superb. Cleaver Gardens, I think, had about £20,000 a year electricity bill just for the landlord lighting. There are so many old light fittings in all those stairwells. So the Build Back Better in terms of improving our carbon footprint and improving the lighting quality in those stairwells, everything actually makes positive feedback. It is actually making things better to actually revitalise and use the latest technology. It will save us a lot of that £20,000. And I say, there's nothing wrong in it, effectively, with what your aims are, but you're just not delivering them. And your budget last week, which had £500,000 of staff savings, will actually mean even less is delivered as the council becomes more dysfunctional as it has less staff. Thank you, Chair.
Any points of clarification? No. I actually think there's an awful lot being delivered in this council since we took control in 2021. And I would actually challenge Councillor Condacourt to go up to a number of the officers in this authority and tell them that I don't see an awful lot being delivered, because that's what he just said. And I think that is fundamentally and grossly unfair. I know a lot of officers who have worked their socks off, and that's a polite phrase. I'm sure many would come up with some more graphic phrases, but they would all be equally valid. To actually deliver at breakneck speed a number of changes, whether it be imposed on us by legislation from central government, whether it be through the regeneration programme and the priorities that this administration has, whether it be through looking after and growing our economy, to the basics of making sure that those in our social housing are looked after and attended to and the most vulnerable protected. I think there's an awful lot going on there, so I think it's a great shame that Councillor Condacourt said what he did, and I hope he will apologise for that. He may disagree with what has been done. That is a fundamentally different issue. But to say nothing has been done is categorically and demonstrably untrue. And I would say, as leader, and on behalf of the rest of the Cabinet, to all of the officers, from the Chief Exec right down to the most humble at the coalface, thank you for everything you have done. Because without you, we set the direction, we set the budget, we enable the money to follow to the projects we want to happen. But without you as the officers, none of it would be delivered, and our residents would be much the poorer without your efforts. And to say that we are making officers' lives worse, again, is fundamentally untrue, because lots of those vacancies which are in there are vacancies which have been there for a number of years and haven't been needed or been unfilled. And we're finding that we are able to do, in a number of instances, more with less, or actually change how we work, because what we did in the old days is no longer fit for the 21st century, and we need to drag this council out of the ark and into the modern era. And that is what we are doing. Some people may not like it, but actually, colleagues, at least we set a legal budget. Not everyone could say the same. So, any other member wish to speak? Councillor Golby.
The staff reorganisation and the removal of vacancies, actually it was the assistant directors in my team that did the staff reorganisation. I asked what they could do, gave them literally a blank piece of paper, and the remit was, the strategy is this, the delivery is up to you, how will you do that? So for you to say that things aren't being delivered, I take exception to. But actually, we've been very, very engaged, particularly in my portfolio, very, very engaged through the ADs who have been actively involved in the restructure, the reorganisation, the service reviews and the outcomes. It's not been me sitting there telling them how they are going to do their jobs, because quite frankly, if I have to sit and tell someone how to do their job, should they really be doing their job? There's a problem. So I don't want it to go into the public record that we've just cut loads of staff positions in this place, because that's not true. Not true at all. And like you say, some of the positions that we no longer require have been unfilled for 2 years. Well, if a job's not being done by someone for 2 years and the world still turns, clearly you don't need somebody to do that job. It makes perfect sense. But I won't have you say that the staff aren't doing their jobs or that they're not delivering, because was what was being said, Chair. And I just want to spring to the defence of certainly my portfolio. Thank you.
Okay. We have the recommendations as printed. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That's carried. That moves us on to item 9, which is the General Fund Budget Monitoring Quarter 3. Councillor Croft.
Thank you for this information to budget the other week, but we are required to bring the outturn reports for the various accounts, and these reports bring it to the end of Q3, which is the end of last calendar year. And the point I would emphasise for the general fund report, which is item 9, which is that while we have had issues within the year with increased recycling costs, increased agency costs, increased audit costs, we've taken some pretty strong action on that front with the recruitment freeze, with getting better investment income, with getting better planning income, thanks to Councillor Smith and his team, and we're now forecasting a £250,000 surplus at the end of the year, which is considerably better than we did at budget setting February 2023. So I'll move the report then as written, Mr Chairman.
We have Mrs Condacore as a public speaker.
Thank you. Because you've got things like saying spend pressure, agency costs are also causing additional pressure on the budget, and at the same time you're saying you've got recruitment freeze, but it doesn't make sense because you actually need the people doing the job so you don't have to pay the agency. So there's a bit of discrepancy there and things. And also it says like number of planning appeals has caused a large increase in legal costs. And then further down it says the planning fee income is in excess of the budget and is expected to remain high during the year. To think, surely the money that's coming in from planning fee income should be for the planning department, so that when there's inappropriate applications which then you reject and lead to appeals, that's the whole point of the planning fees, to balance things out there. So those things seem. I raised this at the last cabinet meeting, and I didn't get an answer, and I don't even know who to approach to get an answer and things. But you've got this thing about audit fees have increased and things, but the pressure of 40,000 in the budget, in your budget things, said that it was due to extra questions and things from external audit because they weren't happy with the accounts and things, not because audit fees had gone up. So there's a bit of a question mark in my head. Is this 40,000 a one-off, or is this 40,000 because audit fees have increased, or is it because you've had this extra need for external audit? I know you'd say you don't answer questions here. Please, can someone point me to who I do ask to actually get the answer? Thank you.
Any points of clarification? No. Any non-cabinet member?
Chair.
You didn't actually put your hand up for me to indicate.
Chair,
Councillor Condacore.
Then I put my hand up. Sorry, the wrong order. But the camera takes a while to pan round, and I just did things in the order that was most appropriate. It's an interesting set of figures, these, because if you look at the top, if you look at page 51, you can see your budget was 18.5 million. And your spending was 19.7 million. So at the sort of top line of the progress report, you're overspending. But then if you go further down, you see various things like the staff wages have gone up less than expected, and you've got more investment income. But a lot of that stuff is timing issues. As my wife said, and I'm not allowed to sit next to her, but she's only just there, it's absolutely important to understand that if we take a lot of planning income, we've then got to spend lots of officers' time dealing with those applications, and the dealing with those applications will be in the next financial year, and any appeals will be in the next financial year, etc. Likewise, building your £20 million hotel or whatever hasn't yet had much of an impact on the interest rates you pay. So on these set of accounts, you're paying just under £500,000 of interest according to his paperwork. But obviously, that will then lead into you paying 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million interest in the next financial year as all these projects actually then are fully paid for. And of course, the hotel we know is going to be yet another month late and another month late, so which means the meagre income from the hotel will be late. So although it looks rosy on paper, it's a timing issue. It's how we effectively have signed all these contracts but haven't yet had to pay for them, or taken in all these planning applications and haven't yet had to deal with them. And the point about staff numbers, if we have a few less planners, if we have a few less people doing Section 106, all these things delay when things happen. But at some day, you have to put that path into Weddington you've got 200,000 for. You have to look at that planning application, go a planning committee, maybe a planning appeal. There is a lot hidden here which is going to come back to bite us. Thank you, Chair.
Points of clarification to Councillor Condacor? No? Anything that members wish to come back on? Councillor Croft.
For planning fees is because we have put in provision, for planning work is because we have put in provision for the planning appeals that are currently taking place. That is very prudent budgeting, because otherwise, if we hadn't done that and say the appeals had not gone our way, we would have been hit with a cost. That is why we have put in the provision. And without going into the details of how to account for things, you can't just mush lines together in the outturns. You can't just say that's got planning on it and that's got planning on it and you can net it off. We do have to disaggregate the income from the increase in fees and the very good work that Councillor Smith is doing in terms of planning performance agreements and really getting the best out of his department. So we have to account for it on that basis. The point about and it's been raised again, so I'll correct it again. The point to Councillor Condacor's comment about cutting heads. The number of heads you have is not a KPI. What we are looking at is transformation, and that is getting a better result out of a smaller staff base. And you can do that lots of ways. You do that through better processes. You do that through taking advantage of new technology. What you don't do is you don't just keep saying, we've got the same number of staff, and we have that exact number of staff, and to alter it is a good or bad sign. That is a very poor way to run an organisation, and just saying, you're going to cut heads and that's going to affect efficiency is not the way we'll approach it. We're going to have a proper transformation programme where we take vacancies, we look at workload, we look at processes, and get to a position where we have a smaller council, which costs less, but a better council that does a better job. And that's the whole point of the transformation plan. Thank you, Chair.
Indicated.
With some of what I was going to talk about, but Councillor Condacor talked about the upfront transactions that we've taken the money in, but we're not going to deal with it till next year. Totally wrong. Totally wrong. A lot of the upfront costs on the appeals that we're currently going through have been accrued over the last 3-4 months while we've been employing a KC to build our cases for these 3 appeals. So it's quite right that we put in that reserve. Fortunately, the planning department is doing excellent work at the moment, and we're well over budget in terms of income, so it does offset that. But you're totally wrong in your assumptions.
Just to pick up on a few points, audit fees have gone up. It's a national issue. We wish it wasn't. It's been a headache for local authorities up and down the country of all colours and none. And certainly something sparking debate in my inboxes from the LGA and the District Councillors Network, and I'm sure the Chief Executive gets similar missives from time to time. But it is correct that if members of the public or indeed members of the council submit persistent queries about little audit things here and there, that has a cost. It's a basic fact. If you ask for someone to do a piece of work which is above what has already been quoted for, there will be a cost to do that. And that does mean that if there are people who do it to make life difficult for officers or try and make life difficult for various other people with an ulterior motive rather than actually trying to make things better, and I think that does happen in a number of occasions, that it is an ulterior motive rather than trying to make a benefit, then that costs the council and it costs the taxpayers, unfortunately. When it comes to agency spending, we need to get this right, that we will only put in an agency request where that position, that job is needed. We will not do that for a position which we intend to leave unfilled or is no longer necessary. And I can tell the public, Mrs. Condacor, Councillor Condacor, every single request for recruitment, which is not a statutory service, comes through me and Cabinet. And I ultimately sign that off as leader of the council for every single request for any recruitment beyond that which is a statutory service. And I do check, and I do challenge, and I do go back and ask the cabinet members, go back to your portfolios and tell me, is this still needed? Is this still relevant? Or is there a different way we can do things? If it is needed, we'll do it. If it isn't, or something can be done in a different way, we go back and challenge, because that's our job. And that's how we make savings, and that's how we make efficiencies, by checking and challenging. And overspending. I think Councillor Croft has said this many times over the past 12 months, but I think it bears repeating. When we set the budget back in for 23-24, there were things which were lumped on us literally after we'd approved the budget, actually, which we had no control over. And I know that the finance director was equally annoyed because it meant more work. So recycling fees from Coventry City Council, they uprated their fees to us after we had set the budget. That was, what, an excess of £120,000 that we had to find. We had the pay award, which was higher than budgeted across the country. We are part of a national joint negotiating committee with the rest of local government, and almost every single council had budgeted for X percentage, and then the awarding body came in higher than everyone expected. So that had, yet again, unforeseen implications across all the different budgets. But we will staff in the right areas. So we've actually increased staffing in the budget in the antisocial behaviour team, because we see the value and the priority of making sure that we defend the interests of those who don't have the ability to defend themselves and want the right to a quiet and peaceful life. And that takes time and effort and work to take through the right processes. And when it comes to the hotel, Councillor Condacore is quite right. We haven't necessarily borrowed as much as we expected at this stage. That's because it's called prudent treasury management, where we don't need to borrow at this precise moment in time. We don't do so. We only borrow at the moment we actually need to borrow on the open market. I'm not a financial guru or accountant. That's what I quite honestly pay the finance director for, to give that advice and tell me when is the right time to borrow internally and when is the right time to borrow on the open market. And if she says to me, it's better for me to borrow internally and wait a bit until we look on the open market, then that is what I and the rest of Cabinet will do. And Councillor Croft has explained that at however many meetings it has been over the past 3 years, and it hasn't gone in, probably won't go in, but we will repeat it as many times as is necessary. Anything you want to come back on that, Councillor Croft?
Is that we have now, of course, retooled our regeneration programme so that there will be no additional general fund exposure in terms of our borrowing costs. So when the borrowing costs start to hit, you will also see in another line, because we can't combine it together because that's accounting, the offset of the income from the projects.
Anything else from Cabinet before we vote on the recommendations? No, in which case all those in favour? Thank you. That moves us on to the HRA account budget monitoring. Councillor Croft.
For the HRA, which as we know is in a bit of flux because this is the last, we are currently in the last financial year where we're using the old business plan because of the issues we've discovered during this budget setting process. But even under that burden, we're projecting to come in under budget by about £140,000 at the end of this financial year. So I'll move that.
Golby, thank you. Mrs Condacore, you put down to speak on this item. Housing revenue account.
Sorry. For the council house and hostels income, assumptions for rent are not being achieved. Now, is the council house referred to the town hall here, or what used to be the council house and is now Eden House things? And given that we've got high levels of homelessness, surely, I don't understand why those aren't at, capacity, and why is the rent not being achieved? I've put here table on page 61, but I don't know which 61 it was.
Have you found your point now, Mrs. Condacor? Is that the end of your public speaking? Okay. I thought you were looking at something in your papers and going back to your papers. Sorry. Okay. Okay then. Any points of clarification to Mrs. Clarification? Okay. Any non-cabinet member? Councillor Condacor.
We have all these appendix. It says what number they are on the front, so we can actually find things easy when there's so many different addendums. A couple of points I wanted to make. We keep referring back to the mess the last Labour administration has left us in without actually explaining what that is. We seem to actually have a roughly balanced housing revenue account. We seem to be paying off money for depreciation and money against capital things. So I don't see the housing revenue account crashing in this update. And it would be really useful, like the comments we had a couple of weeks ago at budget, where we say we're going to end up with £300 million debt, to actually see the graphs of that and to see where that relates to what's going on here. Because we seem to be flying level here in terms of income and expenditure, roughly. And over the very long term, if you wait long enough, an ice cream will cost £1 million or a pint of beer will cost £2 million. So when we just throw numbers around, it is very useful to know whether that's indexed or not indexed and what decade or what century that refers to. In terms of a bit more of the detail, it is really useful looking at Appendix 1, which is on page 60 and 61, because there are various things going good and going bad. I am worried by the assumed rents are not being achieved line, because that's actually quite a big bit of income, 26.8 million or 26.4 million. Are we not getting our voids back into use enough? Yeah, it'd be useful to get some clarity on where we're missing our expected rent income. And there's a lot of good news, and potentially more good news about utilities. And if we start greening up, it does say savings in relation to utilities as one of the things we've actually benefited from. And actually, we've done a lot of refurbishment. Reg Haddon Court has had a new roof recently. We didn't put solar panels on. So while we had the scaffolding on, we should be doing these sort of jobs and actually getting the revenue account in even better shape. Thank you, Chair.
No. In which case, it's open to debate. Councillor Golby.
Clearing up a few misconceptions, council house and hostels income, we are very unlikely to be receiving a £26 million income off homelessness. The council housing stock, however, will generate that income. It's council house, as in the stock, not just Eaton House next door. Because if we're making 26 million quid off Eaton House next door, I am totally in the wrong line of business, and I'm going to open up my own hostel tomorrow. So that is one. I've just explained that, yes. So it's the council house and hostel income because it's income from council houses and hostels. Again, 26 million. We don't just throw numbers around. Again, this is quite disparaging to officers who are spending an awful lot of time unpicking all of this stuff going on. I mean, Vicky sat there, and to say that she's just throwing numbers around, I was very clear at the budget setting last week that the numbers that I was discussing was not anything politicised. It had come from our finance team, the head of which is sat there. She does not throw numbers around. She provides accurate information for us to base our business plans going forward, and we are reviewing the business plan. And the numbers that were the 300 million is over the life of the business plan, which was explained last week. At the end of that business plan, that is what the debt position, having paid off debt up until that point, we would still be left with over £250 million to pay off, should we follow that business plan, which is why we're reviewing the business plan. I made that very clear last week. It was explained in detail. And the assumptions that rent isn't being achieved, again, it's one of those things that you keep saying that we keep banding about. When we've done the deep dive into how we are efficient and how streamlined the services are, the rent is not being collected in a timely manner, which means that people are simply not paying their rent, which is going to change because we have a new team, we have a new structure, And that now comes under my housing officers, not the Revs and Bens officers. Therefore, this whole restructure that you say that we keep pointing back to the old ways, which was the old ways, which was the inefficient ways, which was not bringing in the income that it should have been, is being addressed, has been changed. And yeah, it's there in black and white. The rents weren't being achieved because we simply weren't collecting them. Now we will be collecting them. That line should not be in there for as long, a second longer than it needs to be. We will be getting on top of the rent arrears, and we will be clearing those off as quickly as possible. And again, if people aren't able to pay their rent, we have teams that can help them with that. I explained that at the last budget setting. We have new customer service teams set up within housing to help people to do that. Again, it comes under the new way of doing business, not the old way of doing business which we inherited, which I will keep pointing back to because it was inefficient and it wasn't helpful. So again, another new way of doing business brought in by us. And I will stand on those things, and I will keep pointing that out, because the old way of doing it led to legacy debt, led to crippling finances at the end of the business plan, and we cannot stand for that. So we will be changing things, and it will be dealt with as we are finding them. So I do take exception to the fact, some of the terminology that is used about people banding numbers about and throwing things around, when literally the head of finance is sat there. She does not do that, and everything is based on solid finances going forward. Thank you, Chair.
There are a few points I wanted to pick up on, and these have been mentioned before, but I think it's important to actually highlight them again. Is a lot of the problems that we have found with the HRA is that since 2012, when we had HRA self-financing, and you can argue the rights or wrongs of HRA self-financing, it was borrowed essentially on an interest-only mortgage, so we've only effectively paid the interest off. That was a decision made back in 2012 by the then controlling Labour Council. That debt has now matured, and we are now in a position where we will have to re-borrow some of that money. And interest rates now, compared to 2012 or even compared to 3 years ago, are significantly different. And that means we will have to pay more on that. And as I said at full council before, we should not be in the future in a position where we haven't paid off an element of the capital of what we have borrowed. We need to, I accept on the HRA that you can't necessarily pay everything back in one term, but to not pay anything back and just the interest is not best practice, and it puts us at a significant disadvantage. And part of what has been explained to me by the finance and the housing teams is that a lot of it was based on we would borrow, pay it off, and then re-borrow to pay off what we had, and that isn't sustainable in the long run, which leads to this compounding problem. But when it comes to the rent arrears, Councillor Golby is absolutely right that things weren't being done as they should be. A large part of that is down to COVID, that you couldn't do that. And as I mentioned earlier, in relation to the homelessness item, there is a rent possession protocol, pre-action protocol that you have to go through, a checklist, if you like, which the court will not even entertain giving a possession order unless you have followed certain procedures, and that involves doing your due diligence with your tenants and chasing them up and checking they've been all right, and sending them the requisite letters and chasers and offers of help. Our staff could not physically go out and do that in the height of the pandemic. They are now, which means that we are able to get the processes rolling again, but that, because of the necessity of the pandemic where we couldn't go out, that meant that some processes had to stop because of the nature of what we were going through. But we are picking that up again, with the aim of bringing the rent arrears down. We've always had rent arrears as a council. Yeah. No council is a zero rent arrears. Show me one which is, and I'll show you a fantasy. But we can do better, we must do better, because we need that money in our account, as I said before, so that we can actually upgrade and renovate a lot of our existing stock and buy new stock or build new stock for those who need it. And I have made it crystal clear to officers alongside the deputy leader that the rent situation now needs to be brought to heel. We can no longer keep relying on COVID. We've been out of that for at least 2 years now. Let's get back on target. There were some legislative changes as well that were brought in about length of periods of time for serving documents, etc. But we are getting on top of that, and quite rightly so, because the residents need and deserve that. Any other comments? No? In which case we'll move to the vote on the recommendations. All those in favour? Thank you, that's carried. Agenda item number 11, which is the capital budget monitoring. Councillor Croft.
Outturn for capital at the end of last calendar year. I won't spend too much time on it because it's slightly outdated now. We are forecasting a substantial underspend against budget last year, but that's because we obviously took the opportunity to review the programme and downsize it to make it more economic to our abilities at the moment. So I shall move that.
Councillor Golby, thank you very much. Mrs Condacore, you wish to speak from the public.
Thank you. No, actually 3, because I've just spotted another thing. Changing places, where are those being placed? I know the ones by Bedworth Market, because I understood the one in Nuneaton was going to be in the museum, but you've cancelled the museum project, so I just wonder where that's being done, please. CCTV, I mean, I don't have a problem with more being spent if it's required to get it thing, but I do have concerns as that it's not being used to its full thing. When I asked you at full council, were incidents of, you know, bad driving and things within the town centre that are picked up on the CCTV reported to the police, or would you do that? You didn't want to answer my question. So I want to know if more money is being spent, and that's okay, but it's got to be then the information on the CCTV needs to be used and used fully. And the other thing I've just noticed on Buttermere Recreation Ground, a change request to complete additional works for biodiversity was approved at Corporate Programme Board. Who is this? What thing? I've never heard of this board, and I just wonder who's on it, where it sits, how we know what decisions they're making. Thank you.
Any points of clarification? No? Any non-cabinet member? Councillor Condacore.
To call a £61 million underspend an opportunity to review things. Your capital budget was £88.7 million, and you expect to spend £26.8 million. The sheer error in your forecast of what capital programmes we're going to do is astonishing. And we now have a £43 million cut in regeneration projects as of the budget last week. And I ask a question all the time in my head, what's happened to the project we're cancelling? Because in here, quite a few items like the Wheat Street Junction, etc., the museum upgrade, the current forecast is now zero spending. But we must have spent hundreds of thousands putting planning applications in, design work, both ourselves and the county council. So somewhere there must be some aborted costs. You can't spend all the money designing a museum extension, putting it into planning, and then not do it, and that money not appear somewhere in the accounts. And I understand sometimes you can't put it in as capital because you've not got anything as a result of all this money, but it then must appear in the revenue account as aborted costs, and the compensation to Warwickshire County Council for the money they've spent on projects which you've pulled the funding for. So there's a massive mystery as to where, £43 million of work cancelled. There must be already £1 or £2 million spent, maybe 3 or 4 million on those projects. Where are you hiding that abortive project cost? Or does that appear in the accounts in some future years when it actually crystallises those projects are never happening? On a few more things, I'm always passionate about getting empty homes back into use. It's the biggest no-brainer we've got, is if we've got 1,700 empty homes, if we can get 20 of them into use because we can loan them some money or some of this, and we've got 2 lines on here, empty homes work in default, we're not spending anything on, and empty property loans. These are both really good schemes, and we've got zero expenditure on both. And the final thing I'll mention, Mr. Chair, is the fly tipping cameras. When you first took over 3 years ago, we had Councillor Evans brag about how we had this wonderful £5,000 worth of cameras. And every year it's in the capital budget. And every year it comes in, and then yet again it's been zeroed. So your picture of us spending all this money on fly tipping prevention is as fake as your league tables as being best in the region. The fly tipping cameras are a really good idea, but we just keep saying we've got them, we're installed, they're working, and then the accounts show they don't exist. So can we please have some real spending and some real effort in our capital programme and our revenue on fly tipping, because we are nowhere near the best in the West Midlands. We're not the worst. We have some very active enforcement officers looking at fly tips and seeing what evidence we can pick up. But we need to do better, and that should be in the capital programme, and we should be getting these things working. Thank you, Chair.
Anything in general? Councillor Croft.
Aware that this is the outturn for the current financial year's capital programme, and that the museum project, for example, has been looked at for many years. So some of the costs he is referring to are not hidden, they will be prior year costs, so they will not show in this programme. When it comes to the fly tipping camera provision, I believe that's a provision for maintenance and upkeep and for additional cameras. That we have got the cameras, we have got them in place. And I'd just like to point out some of his wording, really, because he sits there with the. I know I can snark for England, but he does deserve. But it is not an error in the forecasting. It's a quite deliberate change to the programme that we're not going to proceed with some of these elements, and you cannot simultaneously sit there and say that it's terrible that these things are so expensive. It's terrible that these things won't make money. It's terrible that you put all these in the programme in the first place. And then simultaneously sit there and say, oh, but it's terrible that you're not doing it. It's terrible that you've taken it out. I wanted this to happen. Or on, as he was implying on the previous item, that in the long run we're all dead. Like with Maynard Keynes said, it's like, oh, it doesn't matter that the council cripples itself with debt because it'll be in a few decades' time. It is prudent forward budgeting to review your. I wasn't quoting him directly. It's a reference. It's prudent forward budgeting to review your programmes and cut your coat according to your cloth, to use Councillor Wilson's favourite phrase. And the corporate programme board, unless the officers want to correct me, is a very standard practice of an internal committee just to manage capital projects. You'll get that in any company. My company calls it the investment committee, but that's just how it works internally at the council.
Mentioned, but the empty property team are part of the restructure, so we've been looking at the way the empty property team work, and also the loans. Literally, if no one's applying for the loans, we can't give the money out. So there's a little bit of clarification to be done on that. And just to follow on from what Councillor Croft is saying, not that long ago, Councillor Condacourt wanted us to get loans out on all of these projects that we're now not doing. So had we have listened to him at the time, we would have debts on projects that we've now moved out of the programme. So you can, genuinely, you can't have it always. It's like more, depending on which day of the week it is, depends on which approach you get to these capital projects. So we're
If you're saying now it's Councillor Golby's turn. Please be quiet. You misrepresent an awful lot of people and we don't get the opportunity to put you right. So please, Councillor Condacourt, please let Councillor Golby finish. And Mrs Condacourt, carry on and you'll speak no further at this meeting. Everyone has been quiet whilst you've been speaking. Please give them the same courtesy, even if you don't like what they're saying. Councillor Condacourt, glass houses and all that. Councillor Golby.
I'll speak to you outside about some of the things that you've been saying about me in public. I'll be happy to correct you about some of the things that you've been saying that are not honest and correct about me. If you're so up on having that done, I'll be happy to do that. Thank you. So,
I did answer Mrs Condacourt's question at council. Whether she liked the answer, that's a separate issue, but there was an answer nonetheless. And to answer the other point, the other changing places provision in Nuneaton will not be at the museum. It was never intended to be at the museum. It will be a unit installed in the Pingles, and that is all the intricacies and minutiae are being worked out by the team to get that up and running. We've had to secure some other sources of funding along the way to deliver that, but that is on its way. The one in the town centre is earmarked to be the new library, which is the subject of a planning application at the moment, so I can't comment on that too much more. But I think Councillor Croft put it far more eloquently than I had about the various different positions that we have experienced over the years. If I'd have listened to all the advice from over the way in the chamber about I should borrow money for this, I shouldn't borrow money for that, I should borrow it from here, I should borrow it from there, I would have that many personalities, I wouldn't know what to do with myself because I'd be listening to that much conflicting advice. Now, in this job, you listen to an awful lot of advice from your own side, from officers. Usually, at least, that stays the same and will stay in the same direction rather than keeping on constantly changing. And I won't do that. I will do what is right, which is to look at the finances we have available and then go ahead with the projects we can afford without lumbering the residents of this borough with a massive mortgage it cannot pay off. That is financially and politically insane, and we will not do that. Others may choose to do that, but we won't. So that moves us to the recommendations as printed. All those in favour, please show. Thank you, that is carried. That moves us on to Local Council Tax Support Scheme. Councillor Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We bring it at the February budget setting meeting, but we've held it back this year just because we need to update some of the legals and some of the policies as are set out at 4.2 in the report. This is our standard annual scheme to assist people, those who have some difficulty paying their council tax. And the full, I will just point out that the full scheme is not actually included in the paperwork, but we do have the PDF in the electronic copy, but it's as we usually bring it.
I'll second that from the chair. Mrs. Condacor, you put down to speak.
Wording in the scheme, I haven't seen anything come through in recent years about sort of how it's actually being utilised. So are the percentages that people put in and what have you and get out, is it fully utilising the scheme so that the money that is put into it is actually all being utilised for people in the...
I'll just give it a few moments for the public to leave.